medical model deals death as a failure. And that has been taught to all of us, is that if your person dies, it's a failure on the part of the medical system. And then hospice and end-of-life doulas have been outside of that medical model saying, wait a minute, everybody dies.
Welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm Helen Bauer. Today's guest, Barbara Karnes, is an award-winning end-of-life educator and the author of the widely used end-of-life guide, Gone From My Sight. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice podcast is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
Navigating end-of-life care can be confusing and overwhelming. Hospice Navigation Services can help. Hospice navigators are hospice professionals with at least 10 years of hospice experience, trained to provide accurate, unbiased information. Hospice Navigation Services, the guide for your journey.
My guest today is hospice royalty, and she's part of my hospice family. And if you work in end-of-life care, you know that when we say work family, my hospice work family, that has special meaning because we really bond uniquely. And Barbara Karnes is part of my hospice family and part of my hospice journey. Barbara Karnes is an award-winning end-of-life educator, an RN, an award-winning nurse. She was the recipient of the NHPCO Hospice Innovator Award in 2018 and won the International Humanitarian Woman of the Year in 2015. She is the author of Gone From My Sight, which we know in the hospice industry as the Little Blue Book. It even has its own nickname. Gone From My Sight remains the most widely used patient and family educational booklet on the signs of approaching death. It's been in print continuously since 1985 and sold 35 million copies worldwide. And with its publication and distribution, Barbara Karnes has created one of the most important tools in the end-of-life movement today. I will tell you that I have used that in my own field nursing practice. It is amazing. So I am so happy to share my conversation with Barbara Karnes with you today. We had an in-depth conversation about dying at home, what it looks like, the challenges, the pitfalls, what we would want it to look like, and what are the ways caregivers can manage a dying loved one in the home. So here's my conversation with Barbara Karnes. Barbara, welcome back to the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm so glad to see your smiling face again.
You know, it's wonderful always to be with you. So I've been looking forward to this for a while. Thank you for having me.
It's like hospice family.
Yes, our family.
Well, I am going to jump into our conversation today because this is a really timely topic these days and an important topic. And it's been a big focus of the work that you've done for a long time. We're going to be talking about death in the home at the end of a serious illness. In the U.S., we talk a lot about what a good death looks like. And there's a perception that it should happen in the home. But the reality is that's not always the best idea, and it doesn't always look good. And the caregiving burden that it places on people is humongous. And that's one of the reasons you have all the support products that you have at BK Books, is because caregivers are a lot of times struggling to do this job on their own. I think we have a really skewed idea of what a death at home looks like. How do you think we got that so blurred and so mixed up?
Well, it used to be that people died at home, in the 30s, 40s, even the 50s, possibly some of the 60s. People died at home. We were multi-generational. Grandma lived at home with us, and when she got sick, she went to the upstairs bedroom. We took care of her, and there she died. We were there We saw grandma naturally dying, and it was sad, but we weren't afraid because this is part of life. Then our medical system developed to a place where over the years, people went into the hospital and there they died. And today, most people either die in the hospital or in a nursing facility. And we aren't there. We, the watchers, have not seen the dying unfold. And the only role models we have these days is television and the movies. And that's not how people die. And yet we expect, just like Judi Dench says a few words and then gasps and closes her eyes and she's dead. That's what we think mom's going to do. And she's not, because there is a natural unfolding of dying, a gradual death. But because we're not there and haven't been there, we don't know. And that's why you and I are talking and trying to show people, to tell people there is a natural way of dying. But because we don't have that knowledge, people think something pathological is happening.
And we're several generations removed from that. That's what was being done in the 30s and 40s. But in my lifetime, I was born in the mid-60s. That's not the way things have been done. Everything is very clinical. It's medicalized. You have a way of saying it that it's a psychosocial and a communal event, a human event, death is, where I think we've created this perception and an expectation that a death should be sterile and separate from us, and not so much about the person, but more so about the medical treatment.
Well, our medical model deals death as a failure, and that has been taught to all of us, is that if your person dies, it's a failure on the part of the medical system. And then hospice and end-of-life doulas have been outside of that medical model saying, wait a minute, everybody dies. Our body, from the time it was created, was made to die. We are born, we experience, and we die. It's the name of the game. And we've overlooked that as we have grown medically in our facilities. And so now death is considered a failure instead of part of the normal life experience.
I think it's even reflected in the way we talk about it. We say a person has lost their fight with cancer or lost the battle with heart disease or Alzheimer's. Yeah, it's definitely a cultural perception, at least here in the United States.
Well, if we even talk about it,
Right.
Most of the time it's other people die. I'm certainly not going to die, and neither is anyone close to me. And so we don't prepare. We don't think about what to do when we reach that point. That's why getting advance directives is so important, and how most of us don't do it. We've got it in our head. If I talk about it, then that means it's going to happen. And so we try and skip that part of reality.
So let's talk about those realities, Barbara. You've been at the bedside for thousands of patients, and all of your books and videos are geared towards supporting caregivers who are caring for somebody who's seriously terminally ill. Let's talk about the realities of caring for someone who's dying. What does that look like?
90% of the work that we do in end of life is education, because we don't know what it looks like, and therefore we think what's happening is pathological. There are just two ways to die. You either die fast or gradually. And fast death, you get hit by a truck, heart attack, suicide, you're alive 1 minute and dead the next. Gradual death has a process. And gradual death is either from disease or old age. And that process begins months before death occurs. And there are things that we look for, signs that tell us that the dying process has begun. Don't even have to know the person's diagnosis to know if the dying process has begun. All you have to do is look at a person's eating habits, sleeping habits, and socialization habits. Because all of us, when we die a gradual death, months before, with old age, these things can be years. But for someone who has a disease process, what we want to teach anyone who will listen, that a person will gradually stop eating, because food's the gas we put in our car to make it run, and the body's preparing to let go. So all by itself, it's going to cut back and stop eating. The body's going to start sleeping more. Starts with an afternoon nap, then a morning and an afternoon nap, asleep all evening in front of the TV. We gradually sleep more and more because we're loosening our hold on this life, on this planet. And then our social interactions, again, months before death. The guy that follows the whatever sports team, not interested anymore. And then pretty soon it's, don't have the grandkids come over. I'm too tired. And then they withdraw completely within. And that's what they're supposed to do. Then that's what we look for. Then what I call labor begins 1 to 3 weeks before death. There are certain signs that we watch for that say the person is working to get out of their body. And then there's the moment of death. If we can teach anyone who will listen about this, they can create a sacred experience with this end of life experience. If we don't get people educated, then fear, because we don't have role models, fear takes over. And that's where I got sidetracked. That's where the caregiver has, I think, the biggest challenge is if they're not educated, if they don't learn what is going to be the next few months for them, then they're going to do all the care that's focused on someone who is going to get better. And taking care of someone at end of life is, as they approach the end of their life, is different than taking care of someone who's going to get better. The eating, the sleeping, the withdrawing. We need to know that because that affects the kind of care that we, the caregiver, are giving. And all of that knowledge will help us have that sacred experience.
I think that the expectation, and you can speak to this, the expectation that someone's going to get better, mom is going to get stronger. It's a denial of the realities of what's happening, an unwillingness or an inability to accept, what's getting ready to happen. But would you say that it's a reflection of anticipatory grief along with the lack of education? And of course, the misconception that we have about, everybody lives forever and you just push and do treatment right up until the end. Do you think that sometimes grieving gets in the way of helping people to move into this with a little more ease?
I am always going to want my mom. Even if I don't like my mom, I still want my mom. And so I'm going to do everything I can to keep mom alive. And even if mom's non-responsive, if she's on a ventilator, I can touch her, I can hold her, and it's my mom there. I'm going to say it. I think so much of our anticipatory grief and even our following the death grief is very self-centered. Most of us have a belief system that says when you're dead, you're in a better place. And even if you don't believe that and you believe nothing happens, that's even better than being in a body that's not functioning, a pain-filled body. And so most of our belief system says when you're dead, you're in a better place. So our grieving is for us, for ourselves. I'm not going to have mom, and I want my mom. And I think that's probably the biggest unspoken reason we, the family, won't sign a DNR form, won't even listen to a no code, and mom can be totally non-responsive and on a ventilator and on dialysis, and her body is dying. But we want to have mom here as long as we can.
Right.
I think that's the key emotion that we're dealing as caregivers, as family, as special people of someone who's dying. It's, I can't let go of mom.
Yeah, that unwillingness to recognize that and to lean into it. What advice would you give to caregivers who are managing the care of someone they love who's dying at home?
I think the biggest gift we can give to any person is to allow them to die at home. You can ask everyone on the street and say, where, when it comes time for you to die, where do you want to be? I want to be at home. Yeah. I want to be in my bed. That's the gift we can give our loved ones. But we need the support and guidance to do that. We need the knowledge of not only what's going to happen, but what to do while it's happening and when it's happening. Our caregivers are the unsung heroes because we tend to put all of our attention on the person that's dying. And that caregiver is kind of in the background, and no one stops to say, how are you doing? Because not only do they have all the physical work of taking care of someone who's ill, they have the emotional heaviness of knowing that this person isn't going to be here, that they're going to die, and that the responsibility for caring for this person is on the caregiver's shoulders. It's the responsibility that adds to the grief and the fear that we're carrying as caregivers.
Navigating end-of-life care can be confusing and overwhelming. Hospice Navigation Services can help you navigate hospice care for the best end-of-life experience possible. Hospice navigators are hospice professionals with at least 10 years of hospice experience, trained to provide accurate, unbiased information. Our team's compassion and respect for quality of life allows them to help you focus on getting the kind of care you want. When you need in-depth information about hospice, a Level 1 navigation session can provide information on what hospice care includes, roles of the team members, and how to choose a hospice agency. A Level 2 session is the best choice if you want to include multiple members of your family or caregiving village, and includes an explanation of hospice costs and coverage. If you have specific questions about a current hospice experience, a question and answer session with a hospice navigator can give you the answers you need. Watch for the launch of the Hospice Navigation Services in January 2023. Hospice Navigation Services, the guide for your journey.
You know, Barbara, a lot of our caregivers are remote these days. They're not actually there to provide hands-on care inside the home, but if they're living from a distance, they still help with decision-making, healthcare decisions and household tasks, coordinating the caregivers, the caregiving system that's there. And still, that's the same sort of responsibility and still interwoven with the same anticipatory grief and all these different layers that come with that. What would you say about the guilt and the regret that caregivers deal with when their loved one is dying, especially somebody who may be trying to help and care for somebody from a distance?
Our natural inclination is I want to be there in person. And life for many of us has prevented us from doing that. And so what I want people to know is, aside from the responsibility, before the person gets to the place where they can't support and guide you and give you, here's how I pay the bills, we need to do that way before the person is even acknowledged that death is going to come. And we tend not to do that. But what I want the person from afar who can't get there to know that we've got Zooms, we've got email, we've got cell phones that you can share, FaceTime, that's the word I couldn't think of. And to do that, but there will come a point where your special person won't be able to respond to you. That's part of how people die. And when that happens, it isn't about the words we say, it's about presence. And here you are from afar and you can't get there. So if you can't Zoom and you can't email and you can't do anything, but your special person is days to weeks, is in that labor of dying, sit down in your favorite recliner, wherever that is in the world, close your eyes and visualize your special person in bed asleep. And when you see them, then stand there in your mind for a minute while you're in your recliner and do what your heart tells you to do. That may be to go over to the bed and crawl in bed with mom and hold her. It may be sitting on the bed and just holding her hand, whatever your heart tells you to do. And then talk to her in your mind and say everything in your heart that you need to say. Talk about the good times, talk about the challenging times, say everything. There will come a point in your mind where you know you've said everything you want to say. Sit there some more and just be there. At some point, you'll know that you can get up, open your eyes, and move on. Thoughts are things. And I think it's very important in our grieving and our life moving forward to take that moment, that mental connection when we can't be there in person. You can do exactly what I described if you're there in person, and I recommend it. But if you can't get there, and there's a lot of us that can't, then thoughts are things, and do that in your mind and heart. That's
a beautiful way to stay connected. You don't need technology to do that.
No, you don't.
That's awesome. Okay, so, we have a tendency to say a good death is a death at home, but it's not appropriate for everybody. Either the caregiving system isn't supportive enough, not strong enough, expansive enough to have somebody cared for as they die in their own home, or the person doesn't actually want to die at home, which is fine. That's a very individual choice. Lots of different reasons for that. Children in the home, or not wanting to die in a place where the spouse has to continue to live, leaving a death memory or a death legacy inside the home. What would you tell somebody who doesn't want to die at home?
I would say this is a choice, and I certainly respect your choice. We have hospice houses. I would recommend that you get on hospice for the support. However, hospice inpatient, hospice houses, most of them now have a time limit on them. And so that's a problem. But if you don't want to die at home, then when you're still able, check out a nursing facility, talk to the administrator, go through the whole place, talk to them about what you want and don't want. First, before you do that, talk to your family and say, I don't want to do this at home, and I want you to support me, and here's my ideas. And do you have any ideas? And do your research. Nursing facilities, I would want a hospice or an end-of-life doula to work with me and support me if I were in a nursing facility. And I would check to make sure that it's fine, that my family can be there and sleep there and be there as long as need be. Those are questions you have to ask ahead of time. Because you're right, not everyone wants to die at home. I think most people want to die at home. Actually, most people just want to go to bed, close their eyes, and go to sleep and not wake up. That's our death of choice. But there are those people that don't want to be at home for all the reasons you mentioned. And we support them in that. This is their life choice.
It's interesting the way you said that. You said you have to have those conversations beforehand. That sounds a lot like advanced care planning.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
But I think that's a piece. It may seem like a small piece. Where do you want to die? I think that is something that people overlook when it comes to advanced care planning. They get those big basics, is what I call them. They get a DNR, they get a medical power of attorney, and maybe they have a POLST, an MOLST, 5 wishes, depending on what's legal, a directive to physicians. But they forget to talk about some of these smaller pieces. But when you think about where you want to die, that decision has a domino effect. Because, okay, so I want to die at home. Okay, who's going to take care of you? Is that person capable?
There's a lot of people out there that want to die at home, that are living at home alone.
Right.
And have no caregiver. And then someone has to say to them, there will be a point where, unless you can afford caregiving, which is very expensive, there will come a point where you won't be able to be at home. And we don't really think about that because So, I've had so many patients who lived alone, who had no family. And I could tell you stories now from next week who wanted to die at home. I don't want to go to a facility. And you have to, unless you go to sleep and just don't wake up, which probably is not going to happen, you will need a caregiver. And that's a really hard conversation for us end of life workers to have. And yet it's important.
It definitely is. And those conversations are the reasons that our social workers need to make their visits and our spiritual counselors, our chaplains need to make their visits so that those conversations don't just happen, but they happen with a lot of support and encouragement because those are hard decisions. Like you're saying, caregiving, a caregiving system is expensive. If you don't have the family who's physically capable and willing to come in and do that kind of caregiving job. I've taught families before, if you have one spouse taking care of a dying spouse, you basically have a one-person nursing home staff, which is impossible to maintain.
It's 24/7. And
Yeah.
the caregiver needs support as well. And, our healthcare system has this huge gaping hole in it. And that is we don't have any way of providing caregiving and getting reimbursed for it. And yet it's the biggest, most important facet of healthcare. And I mean, some of our caregivers are taking care of people not in the dying process, but are total care at home for years. And there isn't the support as a community, as a society, as a healthcare system to support that.
Barbara, in all the patients and families that you worked with, how many times did you have a family ask you, well, will somebody be here when my loved one dies? Who's going to come and, how long do you stay when my person is dying?
Well, and it used to be that's what we did. The moment of death is an end of life worker's goal. Death is the goal, and everything we do leads up to the death of the patient. And then gradually after the death, our support gradually declines over time. But the moment of death, that was what I targeted, was to be with the family in the hours before death, because that's the scariest time. No matter how much education we give the caregiver and the family about what's going to happen in the days to hours before death, what dad's going to do, it's terrifying. And we're, as healthcare providers, as end-of-life healthcare providers, when we're there in the hours before death, we're like the conductor conducting an orchestra, and we're trying to create a beautiful melody. And that is to guide all the people there. We're invisible. We're as invisible as we can be, but we're guiding everyone there into having this fulfilled, neutralized fear, sacred memory. I'm sorry to say, but over the years, now most caregivers, most families are alone with their loved one when they die at home. And no matter how much teaching and support we give beforehand, and that's where my books come in and all of that, it's not the same at those hours when it's actually happening. It's really, I think, vital that there is a conductor, that there is someone there so that it will neutralize the fear and give the guidance of what to do. I mean, how many times have you walked into a hospital room or into a home or a nursing home and dad's in labor, and the family and significant others are standing away from the bed and they're watching. And generally, they're even holding their own hands together, clasp, and they're watching. And what they really want to do is they want to get in bed with dad. They want to hold him. They want to talk to him, but they're afraid they're going to do something wrong. And so they do nothing. And that's where the conductor says, hey, you want to get in bed with dad and hold him, even though he's non-responsive, let's do it, and to get each person to go in and say goodbye, have alone time, all of that's important. And that's not going to happen because we can tell the family about it. But when they're experiencing, oftentimes everything we've told them has been forgotten and overridden with the fear that they have.
So, Barbara, so many caregivers across the United States are doing this work. It's a labor of love, but it's still work, caring for someone who is at end of life, someone who's dying, and they'll be present for the death of that loved one. How can our listeners connect with your resources? Because you've got a ton of really great made to fit the situation resources.
Go to my website at bkbooks.com and look through all my materials. They're 5th grade level, short, simple, direct, but gentle. And they explain the dying process. And there's another one that tells you what to do during this time. My newest book is called By Your Side, and that's specifically for a caregiver. And it's a little bit bigger. It's about 70 pages, but it's large print, no medicalese, to give the caregiver support, which I think is really important also. So I write weekly blogs. And when you go to the website, sign up for the blog, you get an email and you can read it. I am proud that our website offers so many tools for people who are going through this experience and who don't understand or don't know what to do.
You provide such an essential service. I'll have a link in the show notes to BK Books. People can also connect with you on social media. You're pretty active on Facebook, interacting with folks, and your blogs are posted there. So, Barbara Karnes, thank you for blessing me today with your warmth and your knowledge and your wisdom. And you're just an amazing human in addition to being a hospice expert. And I'm so glad to talk with you today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. And, I love your work. You're doing great work. Thank you.
Talking with Barbara is always like talking to family. It's just so wonderful. And she's such an incredible source of wisdom and experience. Definitely. There's so much to pull out of my conversation with Barbara. When you start talking about dying at home, we like to make it sound very simple, and it's really not. So I think unrealistic expectations sabotage that caregiving experience. When there's not enough support, there's not enough education, people going into it blind and having that sneak up on them really changes the experience, and I think can leave a really bad memory. It creates a death legacy, is what I call it. What kind of death legacy would you want to have? What kind of death legacy would your loved one want to leave? But I think education and support from the hospice team is the key to everything. Support from all the different disciplines, social workers, chaplains, your aides that help with personal care, volunteers, bereavement coordinators, nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians. And if I'm leaving anybody out, I apologize. But support from all those different disciplines eases that job, eases the caregiving job. There's so much that goes into that. The other thing that I found interesting was the concept of advanced care planning. We do that for healthcare decisions, healthcare decision making. But what about discussing where the patient wants to die? And that's a hard discussion because that's a hard question. You have to actually use the word die. And nobody wants to say that, right? Nobody wants to actually use the D word and actually put it out there, especially when you're talking to someone who's terminally ill. Yeah. If you say, how do you want to die? People will say, I want quiet, or I want music, or I want to be by myself, or I'd like to be outside. I'd like to be under the blanket that my mom made me when I was a kid. When you start talking about actually where do you want to be when that moment happens for you? And maybe that's the way to say it. Where do you want to be when the time comes for the end of your life? Where would you like to be? And who would you like to be taking care of you? Those caregivers, because that job is so expansive, it's super important for caregivers to utilize all the resources that are available, everything that the hospice team can provide. And that includes offers of help that you might get from your friends or your family. Create that caregiving village. Let them support you and let them have time with your loved one, because that's their way of being able to say goodbye. Not just helping and not just giving you time away, giving you rest time, but as a caregiver, you stepping back to allow someone else to have time with your loved one. That's a great gift to give someone else. So Barbara's got a ton of resources for caregivers and for hospice and end-of-life professionals. You can access her resources at bkbooks.com. I really recommend the newest product that she has out, By Your Side, which is a guidebook to caring for someone who's dying. There's an awesome set of pages for journaling the care events that are happening that help you keep track of what's going on in the day-to-day, daily life of a patient. So check out Barbara's offerings at bkbooks.com. Connect with her on Facebook. She has a lot of blogs that are posted there as well. Some great interactions, and you can read her answers to questions. She's amazing. She's an amazing lady with a wealth of knowledge to share. So I really recommend that you connect with Barbara. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments to me by email at host@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.